Welcome back to Train Signal Citrix XenApp training. You're watching Understanding and Configuring Load Management lesson. Alright, so the whole concept behind XenApp is that it is a platform that allows multiple concurrent users to log on to servers, to resources within your farm. Now the idea is you're able to deploy this platform, this environment, very quickly to a large number of users. So it's very possible you can have hundreds of XenApp servers in the environment. Now, when you have that many servers within the environment, the first question, or the most important and the basic question that comes up is, well, how do I load balance the users across my different servers? How do I make sure that users are getting the best user experience and logging in and connecting to the server that has the most available resources for them? That's why I think this lesson, while it's not going to be very, very long, it's going to be one of those central lessons that is very, very important in a XenApp environment. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about load evaluators. What does a load evaluator mean? So we're going to understand what load evaluators mean. We're going to then discuss the load evaluator rules. So every load evaluator is comprised of one or more rules which make up the evaluator. And an evaluator is basically a rule that you assign on a server or on an application or a resource of some type that determines when to accept connections to a particular server or when to forward a connection to a different type of server if it is too busy. We're then going to talk about how you assign load evaluators to resources. So once you've created the load evaluator, how do you assign it to applications and content and servers? We're going to talk about understanding the load statistics. So what is the numerical representation of what's going on from a load evaluator perspective? How does the system translate the load evaluators and the rules that you're configuring it? And what does those numbers mean? What do they mean? And how you can use them for troubleshooting purposes. And then we're going to talk about understanding and configuring load balancing policies. Load balancing takes the idea of load management one step further. So if you have, for example, XenApp servers that are in different geographic locations, you can configure load balancing policies so that users that are coming in from a certain IP address range are connected automatically to those servers that are nearest to them, or to those servers that might make sense to connect those particular users. Or maybe you're doing this because you're being biased. Maybe you have a particular range within the environment that is dedicated to the executive team, and you're doing that on purpose so that you can deliver some type of QoS. So any IP address that's coming from 192.168.0.x, for example, is the executive branch, and I always want them to connect to a set of servers that is dedicated, that is isolated and dedicated for their use. No other users can log in, so they have the best type of user experience. So we're going to discuss how we can tweak load when it comes to XenApp. So let's start off with understanding load evaluators. There are two types of load evaluators that come out of the box. You're going to have the default load evaluator and the advanced load evaluator. Those are very basic load evaluators by nature. The default load evaluator is going to determine the load on the server by the number of users that are connecting to that server. So it's going to load balance the servers by incoming user connections. So if there's 5 users on server A and 10 users on server B, the next user is automatically going to go to server A, and it's going to continue to fill server A with users until the load is even. Now, when server B has more users, and goes to server A, and so on and so forth. But that's just based on how many users are connecting to servers. With the advanced, it goes one step further, and we're going to talk about the exact details of it when we get into it. But with advanced, it takes into consideration the CPU utilization on the server, the memory utilization on the server, the paging on the server, the disk on the server. So it's a little more intelligent than just, well, I'm going to send one user here, one user there, and if this user has less users, I'm going to send more users to it. It's going to determine, okay, well, this CPU or this server has 5 users on it, and the CPU utilization is 90%. But the other server, which is server B, has 20 users on it, but the CPU utilization is 40%. Well, I'm going to send the new users to server B, even though it has more users connected to it, it has more resources available, so the user experience will be better. We're going to talk about how you can get around using any of these default load evaluators and how you can custom create your own load evaluator based on criteria that makes sense in your environment. So let's go ahead and switch over to our server and take a look at all of these settings. Now, when we start talking about load management, it doesn't make sense to have a single server in the farm, right? I mean, it kind of defeats the purpose. If you have a single server, you wouldn't need load management. So what I've done is I've added XA02. XA02 is the exact same thing as XA01, has the same applications, same configuration. I just added it to the farm so that we can talk about load management and make a little sense out of it. Now, when we start talking about load, you'll notice that you have two nodes here, load evaluators and load balancing policies. We're going to start off with load evaluators. And right off the bat, let's take a look at the tabs first. So you have advanced and default. Those are the two default load evaluators that you get out of the box, and we'll talk about how they're configured in just a second. The information tab is just the same thing as with all of them. The alerts, if there are any alerts here. Usage by application is going to show you which application right now is configured to which load evaluator, etc., etc. And the same thing with usage by server. Now you'll notice with usage by server that the servers automatically get the default load evaluator by default. I can't avoid saying default because it's the default load evaluator. So let's take a look at what does it mean when servers are configured with the default load evaluator. So if we go back to load evaluator here and double click on default, first of all, the description is pretty self-explanatory. This evaluator is going to pretty much load manage the servers based on incoming user sessions. And everything is disabled here with the exception of server user rule and also the load throttling rule. So let's first talk about server user rule. If I expand it, you'll notice that it says 100, which means this rule is going to announce that the server is at full load when the number of users that are on the server hits 100. So this server will not accept 101 connections. It will say I have full load, I can't accept another user. It's at 100 users. Now, the way the default load evaluator is configured is, let's say you have server A and server B. Server A has 5 users on it. Server B has 10 users on it. Well, the next user that tries to connect is going to go to server A. Now server A has 6 users. And it's going to continue to fill users on server A until server A and server B are sort of balanced from a user perspective. So that's the whole idea behind the server user here. Server user rule means that the load balancing is going to happen based on incoming users. It's just going to send them to the least server with the least users connected to it. Now, what the load throttling rule does here is it paces how user connections happen on the server. Now, the process of connecting a user to a server is very resource intensive. It takes a lot of CPU, it takes a lot of memory, a lot of disk. So it's an intensive process. What load throttling does is it says, all right, I'm not going to process more than one user at a time. As soon as I'm done processing a user, connecting them to a server, then I'll accept another user. So it paces the number of users that are simultaneously connecting to the server so that the server doesn't get overloaded with the amount of users that are connecting. By default, it's set to high, which means it's going to process one user at a time. Now, with the default load evaluator and the advanced load evaluator, because they're defaults out of the box, you can't change the settings, but you can take a look at how the settings are configured. So those are the two rules that make up this load evaluator. Now, the advanced load evaluator is a little smarter and has more rules in it. So let's take a look at how that's configured. So let's take a look at, first of all, CPU utilization. So the server will report a full load when the CPU utilization hits 90%. It's going to report no load when the server utilization is at 10%. Now, what this evaluator is going to do is, instead of just forwarding users to the server with the least amount of users on it, it's going to take a look at, well, all the servers in the farm and determine which one has the least busy CPU. So if there are certain servers that have 40% CPU utilization, others that have 20, it's going to send users to the one that has more resources, which is 20% CPU utilization. However, it's not doing it just on CPU utilization. It's also doing it based on memory utilization. Again, it's going to report full load when the memory utilization is 90%, no load at 10%. So it's going to take into account the CPU, the memory, and it's also going to take into account the page swaps. And these are the, again, minimums and maximums that are configured. Now, with this particular evaluator as well, you'll see that the load throttling is also enabled, and it's also set to high. So out of the box, what Citrix is saying is that best practice dictates that, look, keep the load throttling at high and let each user get processed completely before you accept another user. This is almost like a logon storm. You don't want a lot of users to connect at exactly the same time onto the server. Now, those are the two load evaluators by default. Now, if you want to create your own, we're going to right click on load evaluator and drag down here to where it says new, add load evaluator, and we're just going to give this a name. Let's stick with CRM load for now. And down here, this gives you the option of what type of rules do you want to configure for this load evaluator. Now, the one I want to talk about is server user load and application user load. People confuse them sometimes. Server user load is strictly on the server, and it strictly deals with how many users are on a particular server. It doesn't care about anything else. If you select it, you have the option here of setting, well, how many users do you want it to handle before it reports a full load, and go more or less. You can configure this however way you want. With the application user load, it's kind of the same thing. You can again change the value of when it reports full load, but it's doing it on a per published application basis. So if I click on browse here, it'll show you all the applications that you have configured or published. If you click on CNN, now it's going to load balance based on how many users are connected to a particular published application, not everybody on the server. Now, these rules are pretty self-explanatory. The context switches, this will deal with, sort of how many context switches are happening at the CPU level, which has to do with queuing of tasks on the CPU and how much time slice you have access to the CPU. So you can look up the values that make sense here. This is all going to be dependent on the application. Some applications will grill the context switches. Some tasks will take up a lot of context switches, which means it doesn't have enough time slice on the CPU to execute. So you can modify those values accordingly. And one thing that I want to make mention of here, the load evaluators are going to have to be custom based on the application, based on the type of users, based on the type of load that you're putting on the server. So this will be very custom. If we take a look at CPU utilization here, again, how much do you want to, when do you want to report a full load, more, less, etc. You can do whatever you want basically here. Disk data I/O is the same thing. Disk operations. IP range is one I want to talk about, but before we talk about that, let's go ahead and uncheck all the rest. Let's select IP range. So you have two options. You have allow and you have deny. What you can do here is if you allow, and you can specify a range. So what you're saying is I want to allow any user that's connecting from an IP 192.168.1.star. So 192.168.1.0 through 255 are allowed to connect to the server. Now, conversely, you can do this a different way and say, I don't want to allow users that are coming in from 192.168.1.0 through to 55 to connect to the server, so you deny them access. Now, why would you do that? Now, you could do that for a number of reasons. Maybe you are configuring particular sets of servers, and you want to reserve these servers to your executive team. You want to reserve these servers so only C-level or VP level can connect to them because you've beefed them up, or before you just want to isolate these servers so that they always have a good user experience, and you're trying to get a raise here and everybody's trying to make a living, so you're taking care of the executive branch and you want to deny access to anybody else. You might want to do it for security reasons, maybe for application load, for whatever the case might be, that you can find a reason for this, but it allows you to configure a range and allow or deny access to this particular server. Now, from a load throttling perspective, again, you can increase or decrease the sensitivity of how you want this to perform. You can go to extreme, or you can go all the way to medium low. We're going to keep this one at default. Memory usage is also, again, we've talked about that, so that we talk about page faults and page swaps, etc., etc. Let's talk about scheduling. With scheduling, you can set when these servers or resources can be accessed. So you might want to say, well, I don't want to to give access to these servers or resources on the weekend. So you can configure that by specifying a schedule for either allowing or not allowing access to these particular resources during whatever time frame or time slice you want to do. So for now, for the purposes of this example, let's just keep it at applications, and let's go ahead and enable load throttling here, and let's keep it memory usage as well. So this is going to be our CRM load evaluator that we just created. Now once you created it, you'll notice that it automatically puts it here into the load evaluator's node, so to speak. And if you want to assign it to a particular server, you're going to select that server on the left, right click it, drag down to where it says other tasks, and then we're going to click on load, assign load evaluator. Now from the drop down box, by default it's set to default. From the drop down you can either go to the advanced one, or you can specify the one that we just created, which is CRM load. If you click on CRM load, click OK. Bada bing bada boom. Now if I click back up here to load evaluators and click on usage by server, you'll see that XA01 is now assigned the CRM load evaluator, which we just configured. Now I was telling you earlier that the system has to be able to translate these load values into some kind of a numerical format so that it understands what's going on. Now it's very important for you to also understand what these numerical representations mean, because they can help you in troubleshooting. Now in order for you to be able to find out what the usage is like on a particular server, we're going to go ahead and open a command prompt up here, and we're going to type the command qfarm/load. Now when you do that, it's going to give you a numerical value. Now XA02 is reporting a numerical value of 0, while XA01 is reporting a numerical value of 20,000. Now what does that mean? So for that, I'm going to switch back to our presentation here, go through what the numerical values mean, then we'll come back and take a look at what else we can do. So when you run the command qfarm/load, the values are going to mean the following. Anything from 0 to 9,000 or 9998, so to speak, is a normal range for load management. This means that the server is in normal state, everything is good. This will vary, if there's one user, it'll show maybe 100, and so on and so forth. That's how you know what type of load is on the server. Now if you have 5 nines, it basically means that there's no load evaluator that's configured on this particular server, and that could give you a hint that, hey, maybe you should configure something for this server. 10,000 means that the load is at 100%. This is important because sometimes you are troubleshooting something and your server isn't accepting user logons. And I've seen this many times with Citrix. And you run qfarm/load and you see that, wow, the load is at 10,000, but I only have 2 users on the server. You check everything, it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you have no users on the server, but the load is showing full. So this gives you hints into, well, did I configure or misconfigure a load evaluator? Why, is there a problem with this particular server? Do I need to reboot it? Something's going on with the server for it to report full load when there's no users on it, and that has happened. So this would give you insight into where to start looking and why the server is behaving the way it's behaving. Now 20,000, which is what we saw basically on XA01, means that the XenApp server has either an edition mismatch or a license mismatch. Now this could mean a lot of things. It could mean that, hey, I have enterprise edition licensing, but right now the server is configured for platinum edition licensing. Well, it's going to report a load of 20,000. If it can't reach the license server, it's going to report a license mismatch, throws the 20,000 number at you. So again, it gives you insight into where to look to troubleshoot what's going on with your particular server. If you have the 9s straight across here, 5 9s or 4 9s and a 0, it just means that there's a farm administrator that you've custom created. You've given that particular farm administrator custom rights, but that particular administrator doesn't have enough rights to run qfarm server/app and qfarm/app and qfarm/zone app. So the particular user doesn't have enough rights to run these commands from a command line, so it'll report that numerical value to let you know that someone is trying to run this that doesn't have enough rights to run it. So again, it gives you a lot of good insight as to what's going on from a server standpoint. Let's go back to our server and see why it's reporting 20,000 at the load level when we know we've configured everything correctly? So what could be the problem? XA01 is reporting a load of 20,000, which means, hey, it's either having a problem connecting to the license server or there's an addition mismatch. Where should we look first? Now, I'm going to give you a disclaimer. It took me about 25 minutes to figure this out. So what I want you guys to do is literally think about it. Maybe pause the video. If you're following along with your own lab and you're getting similar results, I want you to see how long it took you to figure out what the problem was. And seriously, send me a Twitter message. Tell me how long it took you and if you beat my record time, my immense record time. My Twitter is at EKHNASER. Tell me how long it took you. But back to the subject here. What do you think we should look at to figure out why this is happening? Policies? All right, let's take a look at Citrix policies. I know we've configured our Citrix policies properly, but hey, let's take a look again. All right, so we have two policies here. We have the CRM policy, and you'll notice down here, well, it's configured for CTX LIC01. That's my license server. That's correct. That's going through port 27,000, so that's correct as well. And, well, it's set to Enterprise Edition. That's also correct. And I'm applying this to the worker group, and I know that's correct as well, because if I take a look at my worker group here, well, my servers are in there. So, well, let's go back to policies and take a look at what else could be the problem. Maybe it's the unfiltered. Well, that doesn't make too much sense because my policy has a priority of 1, so it's a higher priority, but you never know. Let's take a look. Well, I have it configured on the unfiltered as well, and it looks right. So, what is the problem? Anyone? If I've done my job well, you guys should be thinking about precedence and processing. Do we have any other policies configured in the environment? If anyone says, yes, we configured an Active Directory policy, then you're absolutely 100% correct, my friend. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Group Policy Management console and take a look at the policy that we configured for profile management. So we configured a policy for profile management, right? And that policy is being applied to the server's OU, which has XA01 in it. Now let's go ahead and right click this and go in and take a look at what's going on here. So let's go ahead and do standard here. Let's expand policies. Let's go into Citrix policies. You see, the unfiltered one here is going to take precedence over everything else. So what I'm going to do is, let's see if we can fix this. Let's go into Edit. Let's click on Next. And let's go down here to Server Settings, first off. And let's set the proper edition. We're going to go with an Enterprise. And then let's go back up to Licensing. And let's put in the right value. We're going to do CTX-LIC01 here. I'm going to click on Save. We're going to exit out of Group Policy Management console. And I'm going to bring up the command prompt again. Now, let's go ahead and enforce the policy. Let's refresh the group policy that we just did. I just like to do a GP update /force here. All right, now let's run qfarm/load again and see if the number changes. All right, so the number actually changed. But so here's the trick. Now it changed to a full load on the server, and I know I'm the only one logged into the server. So I'm going to give it a few minutes here for the group policy to just settle in, and we're going to run qfarm again and see if that number changes. It should be around 100. You know, typically every user session is roughly around 100. That's the number that we want to be at. So let's see if that number changes in a second or two. All right, let's do this again. And there you go. So the number is going down, and if you reboot this machine, you'll notice that it'll go back down to 100. So this is just a matter of basically allowing the group policy to sort of settle in for now. See, if I do this again, it's constantly going down, so it'll eventually settle at around 100. Now, there are other qfarm commands that you can run. So another one would be qfarm /app. Whoops. 2 R's won't make it. So if you run that, that gives you information about the particular load on each XenApp server per application. So it'll be application specific. It also gives you the streamed applications as well, and you'll notice those don't have any particular server that it's associated with. But the rest, it'll give you the application, which server, and the load that's currently on it. So these are just commands that would help you manage your load on a particular XenApp server or in the XenApp farm in general. Alright, now let's get out of here, and now I want to focus our attention a little bit on load balancing policies. So let's go ahead and get out, and if we select load balancing policies up here, we right click on it. Let's go ahead and create a new load balancing policy, and let's call this Chicago servers. That's what we're going to call this one. You can give it a description if you like, and we want it to be enabled. Now, from a filters perspective, how do you want to filter this? We've seen the access control numerous times in earlier lessons. This has to do with the access gateway. You can filter it based on client IP addresses. So which IP address range? Again, let's do 192.168.1.star here, so that anyone, coming in from this particular range is going to have the load balancing policy applied. You can also do it from a client name's perspective. You can do it from a user's perspective, etc., etc. But the load balancing policy itself, this is where the meat and potatoes is going to be, right? So if you want to assign it to a particular worker group, maybe if you want to load balance based on, you want to give those users only access to a set or a subset of servers via a work group, you can do that. This is very similar to what we did with the load evaluator rule that was IP range based. So this is very similar to that, but allows you to get a little granular. So you can come down here, and let's say you want to select the CRM servers. Let's go ahead and add them and click on OK here. The nice thing here is you can have a primary and a backup. So you can, if you had more worker groups, so let's say you want users that are connecting from that range to always go to those particular servers. So you're doing this from a performance-based perspective. However, if those servers are unavailable for whatever reason, maybe they're in maintenance, whatever the case might be, you can add another worker group and prioritize them. So again, priority 1 is going to be the preferred server they connect to. If these aren't available, then they can connect to the second level here. So it might be CRM servers backup with a priority 2. They'll be able to connect to that, and you can set the priority up or down. Well, you can also do the same thing from a streamed app delivery perspective. So if you enable set the delivery protocols here, again, pay attention here to some of the notes, because what you're doing here is basically saying that any users that are in the IP range 192.168.0.x to .255, you're forcing them to allow the application to stream, so you're able to stream to the client, or you might want to force them to not allow it to stream to the client. So for example, if they're connecting from the outside world and you don't want that application to run on a foreign machine, you can configure a policy to disable it specifically and explicitly, or you can force the application to stream to the client, whereby if it's, usually if it doesn't stream to the client, you can allow them to log on and run it on terminal server. Here you're forcing it regardless of what other rule is happening. I want you to stream to the client. So again, you're overriding a lot of policies here. You're overriding a lot of things that you might have done earlier, but this gives you an easy way of overriding certain things and customizing who gets what when, based on a number of criteria. So the load balancing policies can come in handy. Just be careful how you're using those in conjunction with other things you might have configured in the environment earlier, so that there's no conflict per se. And that's it from a load management perspective. What I'm going to do now is we're going to switch back to our presentation to recap what we've learned. And this was a cool lesson. Load management is truly one of my favorite topics, and I hope you guys really enjoyed this. There was a lot of information that sort of ties the environment together and shows the value and the strength of why you're deploying a platform or an enterprise class technology like XenApp. So what we covered in this lesson is we started off by talking about, well, we're trying to understand load evaluators and what are the load evaluators, what are they used for, and we talked about how load evaluators are a collection of rules. So it can have one or more rules that make up a load evaluator, and the load evaluator is what's going to evaluate the incoming user session and determine where to place that user, and it's going to place the user on the server that makes the most sense, on the least busy server that has the most available resources that could give the user the best user experience. That's from a load evaluator perspective. We talked about how you can assign these load evaluators to different resources, but then we talked about understanding the load statistics. So we did the qfarm/load, and we talked about the different numerical values and what they mean, and we went through the exercise of, well, we had XA01 showing 20,000 from a load perspective, and we went and determined that we had a group policy processing conflict that we didn't pay attention to that was not delivering the right addition or the right value for the license server, and we fixed that, and then we did a GP update or rebooted the box, and we saw that the load started to go down, and we were able to bring it down to in the 5,000 range. Then we talked about the load balancing policies and what they mean. Now, load management is important because it allows you to tweak how users are connected to sessions and when to connect them where it makes sense from a user experience perspective. But it also helps you in configuring certain rules and restrictions on who can access which servers or which resources during which time from which location. You can even extend that to streaming applications, so that maybe certain applications you don't want to allow users that are coming in from a certain IP range to be able to stream these applications. Maybe you want to force them to stream it. You don't want them to revert back to, if you can't stream it, then log on to a terminal server and stream it or use a published application. So it allows you to put a set of policies on what the users can and cannot do from a load perspective. So it helps you tweak that environment, fine-tune it that much more. Finally, I hope this lesson was informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.